So we left off Leviticus 16. That was our last passage. And at the end of Leviticus 16, in a sense, everything was set to go, because Leviticus 16 came hot off the heels of Exodus chapter 19, where we saw God kind of formalize his relationship with the people of Israel. The seed was planted in Genesis 12 and 15 and 17 when God made his promises to Abraham. But by the time you get to Exodus 19, the people have begun to grow into a fully fledged nation. And so Exodus 19, 20 through to 24 is God formalizing and establishing their place as a nation in his purposes. And in those chapters, he lays out what the kind of guidelines for family life are going to be, and he even makes provision for their failure in Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement, that means that their place in his promises is guaranteed for them. And then he just kind of points them in the right direction and says, now just head to the promised land. It's roughly sort of 2 weeks journey. That's all it would have taken. And he says, just head there, and head there by faith. But by the time we get to Deuteronomy chapter 28, which is the study next week, 40 years has passed and the people are still stood on the edge of the promised land. You wouldn't notice that if you just went from Leviticus 16 through to Deuteronomy 28. But we've got to know 40 years have passed. So why, given it was about 2 weeks journey, have 40 years passed? Well, the moment of truth came in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. The key moment when, as the people approached the land, they sent a little group of spies into the land. They chose 12 people, one from each of the different tribes of Israel, and said to them as a group, head into the land, spy it out. Come back with reports of what it's like, and we can make a plan for how we're going to conquer the land together. So that's what happened. 12 men are sent out, among whom are Joshua and Caleb. And they go into the land and they see it all, and they see how amazing it is and how good it is. So much so, in fact, that they bring back with them a bunch of grapes that's so big that they need to get a stick to put it on and 2 men to carry it with them as a sign of how good this land is that God has promised to them. And so they come back a few days later with their reports, and they're full of how good the land is, how wonderful it's going to be, and how true to his promises God has been. But then at the moment of truth, when Moses says to them, and the people say to them, right, shall we go in now? Shall we take the land? 10 of the 12 men say, oh, no. No, I mean, it's a wonderful land, but it's full of people who are way bigger than us. And if we go in there, they're going to beat us. Any kind of fight, we will lose. And Joshua and Caleb, the other 2 of the spies, are listening into this, and they kind of fall on the ground and say, no, God has promised us. He's made a promise to us that we can go in, we can take this land. We just need to go by faith, trusting what he said. But sadly, the other 10 win the day, and the people of Israel get spooked, and they refuse to trust God's promises, and they believe these 10 other people instead, and as a result say, we can't do it. And God says to them, you should trust me. But because you won't trust me, now this whole generation will not get to go into the land. It's another kind of heart sink moment that we get as we read through the Bible story, where God is so good and true and trustworthy in his promises, and the people just lack faith. That's all he asks of them. Just trust me. Just do what I say. And so they said, well, look, if we go into the land, our children are going to be taken by these people, and a whole generation will be lost. And so God says to them, well, a generation will be lost, but it's you guys. Only your children will get to go into the land, together with Joshua and Caleb, men of faith. And that's why that 40-year period passes between Leviticus 16 and Deuteronomy 28. And the rest of the book of Numbers, well, it's characterized by 2 things: grumbling and grace. You see, this picture of the people of God kind of outside of the land becomes a paradigm, really, of the Christian life as the New Testament takes it. Standing by faith on the edge of the promised land. And Numbers teaches us 2 things. First of all, that people have a tendency to grumble. I've been reading through the book of Numbers just in the last few days, and it's you kind of get a sense of deja vu as you read it, because the people grumble against God, and he reacts to that, and then resets, and then they grumble again. And you're reading it thinking to yourself, am I rereading what I read before? Because grumbling is their tendency. it's a good lesson to us as people who stand on the edge of God's wonderful new creation. Are we people of faith, or are we people who just grumble about our lot all the time? It's a story of grumbling, but it's also a story of grace. God's consistent grace to his people. You see him again and again providing for them as they journey around and about towards the promised land. He defeats their enemies as he promised he would do. As they lack water at moments, the water comes from the rock and provides for them. They grumble, but God is gracious all the way through, until you get to the book of Deuteronomy, where the next generation are then stood on the edge of the promised land waiting to go in. Another moment of truth as God addresses to them and says, if you obey, this is what will happen. If you disobey, this is what will happen. But I won't say more than that, because that's what you're going to study next week in Deuteronomy 28 to 30. So enjoy reading ahead, and I'll see you there.